We're back from recess. We are now on Chapter 9, Public Accountability, Standards and Practices, Part 1, Office of Public Accountability. The first amendment we have is SB 276 JBTMB L4 P106, line 4, page 106, introduced by Senator Joanne Brown and Vice Speaker Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes. Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're putting forth this amendment to the Office of the Public Auditor primarily to do several things. Of course, in the current budget bill, there's an appropriation for this annual budget for 2023 of $1.653 million. One of the first amendments that we're adding to this is to include an additional $371,602,000. Primarily to be able to address what would be the difference. Because if you notice in the amendment, one of the things that we were including and what we would like to see for future budget years moving forward is that the Office of the Public Auditor would receive 0.25% of the overall general fund gross revenue. When the Office of the Public Auditor was originally created in statute, this is actually one of the provisions that was put in place and subsequently was amended to simply have a direct appropriation. I think we recognize, I certainly do, and the Vice Speaker does, with regards to the importance of the autonomy as to the reason why the Office of Public Accountability was created. We're in the process right now of reviewing what has now become a $1 billion budget within the government of Guam. I think it's very critical, Mr. Chair and colleagues, that we ensure that the public money, our people's money that's being put forth, that we have been given the opportunity by sitting in the legislature to appropriate, is being properly spent. And certainly the key ingredient to ensure that happens is to ensure the public auditor has the resources. Of course, currently B.J. Cruz is our current public auditor. But for his position now and any future public auditor to have the resources available, including the staff capacity, to be able to do these audits. And certainly I have further amendments down, the Vice Speaker and I have another amendment further down relating to the Public Auditor's Office to ensure that the Public Auditor will have the resources and the ability to pursue further action should they need to, if they determine there's any improper activity in the government of Guam. I look at this as a vote against corruption in the government because certainly I've been around, and many of us have been around many years to know, unfortunately, that there's a misuse of public resources, sometimes by the very public officials that have been put in positions in this government. And I think we need to ensure exactly what we say when we say the Office of Public Accountability, to ensure the accountability of how the people's money is being spent. Another key issue that the public auditor has raised and brought to our attention is the concern that he has had with regards to autonomous agencies in the government directly paying for the audit services that are being provided to their entity. This amendment that's being included would require essentially that all of these autonomous agencies would forward their funds to an account with the public auditor. It will be the public auditor that will essentially oversee these audits and also ensure and be able to provide direct payment. The public auditor has been concerned that because these autonomous agencies have developed their own relationship, they might be under the impression that they're not ultimately responsible or responsive to the public auditor's office. So certainly by putting this in place, we are hopeful that the autonomous agencies, at least in this case, shall comply with this requirement to forward these funds on an annual basis to the Office of the Public Auditor to be the one to oversee and execute these audits. And then, as I mentioned, with regards to the 0.25 requirement moving forward out of the general fund, of course, I recognize that we've pretty much completed most of this budget and would require an additional effort to go back and renumber the figures of all the appropriations that have been made thus far. So certainly, if we're able to add the additional $371,000 to this budget, which would equal what the public auditor would receive had this 0.25 been put in place for fiscal year 2023, this will increase the public auditor's budget to over $2 million. And certainly, while that sounds like a lot of money, it's a very small amount in comparison to the overall responsibility of the public auditor to review the audits and the budgets for the government of Guam and how the funds are being spent. But hence, moving forward come fiscal year 2024, this requirement would be put in place so that it would allow the public auditor the autonomy that he needs. And also, the public auditor's office and their budgets would be released equally every month, so we don't have any concern of the governor's office or any future governor impacting or trying to impede the work of the public auditor by not releasing their allotments and their funds to fund their office. So overall, Mr. Chair, that's essentially a summary of what this amendment is being put forth, and I certainly would like to add if the clerk can make the proper technical corrections, and legal counsel also can address those technical corrections with regards to the new sections that are being added to the original appropriation that's listed in the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Promise I'll make this short, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to rise in support of this amendment. I'd like to thank the good senator from Chalampago for allowing me to work closely with her on this, as she has been working a long time closely with the public auditor. And more importantly, as I am the oversight chair of Office of Public Accountability, and something that we have heard over and over and over, the need to support their efforts and the autonomy that is needed for them to be, so that they can go and do the mission mandate as it relates to the audits that go around within our government of Guam. This is a good bipartisan effort. I think it shows that this August body, the 36th Guam Legislature, is doing their due diligence, and I support that effort, Mr. Chair, and I really hope that our colleagues can get on this and support this effort. Sinamasi.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question I'd like to proffer to the author of the amendment, if she would yield to that. And the question is, it's really at the bottom of the amendment. You know, on the last paragraph, DOA will give them no less than 1/12. But at the very end, it says the budget of OPA shall be exempted. If they're going to get it every month anyway, what do you need to exempt them? Because the law will state you will get no less than 1/12. You're going to get every penny that you're by law. So I'm just trying to understand. I have no true objection. I just want to make sure we're not saying you're going to get it, and we're going to make sure you're going to get it. It doesn't, I don't know. Maybe the author will yield to that question.
Does the author yield?
I think we just, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, to respond to the inquiry by Senator San Augustine. I guess we just want to make it, double sure that there's no misunderstanding that the public auditor on a monthly basis is going to receive his allotment, and that it's not going to be in the control of anybody else other than ensuring that he receives his funds. I have no objection if you want to change the language, but I think it's like sure, and double sure that he's going to receive his funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator San Augustine?
I'd just like to thank the author for her response. I have no objection. We can move on.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the author or the co-sponsor will yield, on Section 4, there's a requirement now that the OPA shall receive a continuing annual budget of not less than 1/4 of 1%, 0.25% of the annual total general fund revenues of the government of Guam. And my question would be, which of the general fund total is the 0.25 being applied to? For example, is it the gross of the general fund revenues received before deductions for tax returns or pharmaceutical funds? Or is it the general fund balance net that is available for appropriations across the government of Guam? So what is the figure that you're looking at?
Thank you, Senator Torres. Does the author yield?
Well, Mr. Chair, in terms of how the language is written, I look at it as I'm not specifying that it's going to be after any amount. It simply says that it will involve the general fund gross revenues. Unless there's any other interpretation, that's how I interpret it.
There's a big difference, though, and that's what I'm trying to understand, because if you look at what the general fund revenues gross is, less any deductions for set-asides or payment of finances or tax refunds, that's a very large amount compared to what the net is that we then appropriate in the budget bill. So That would be, there's a very big difference, and that, I think, needs to be clarified, because this almost reads, if it's the gross revenues, it's the top line, not the bottom line for appropriations. And we can refer back to Section 1. It's a very big, very different number. So I think that number 1 is problematic, and that has to be answered before we even move forward. And then the second question I have is the 1.653 is that amount right now is less than 0.25%, correct? Is that what was stated? And that was why we had to appropriate an additional 371,000?
Does the author yield to that question, or the
Mr.
co-sponsor
Chair,
yield?
Yes. Yes, that is correct, based on my interpretation. Unless somebody can tell me something different, that was my understanding, based on the information provided.
Senator Torres?
Well, I just think, Mr. Chair, my question hasn't been answered because nobody seems to understand what that number is. And then also, as the revenues, assuming it's on gross revenues or revenues collected, whether it's gross or for appropriations, if it's a set amount that they're to receive, as that revenue number rises and falls, logically that receipt of 0.25 isn't fixed at 2 point, whatever 1.6 and 3.71 adds up to. It's not fixed at that because it's a percentage of a moving number. Perhaps OFB or somebody can answer that, because I'm just not clear what this number is that we're appropriating. In the past, we've appropriated a set amount, and now we're appropriating a percentage, but we're not even sure, we can't even answer whether it's a percentage of what, the gross or the net.
Mr. Chair, just based on that, if I may.
Yes.
As simply put, if we're looking at the gross, it would be for the total government budget based on the formula that is put here. So there is a difference between the gross, which is the overall, and the net, which would be minus whatever needs to be taken out from the top. So based on that, we are not looking at the net, we're looking at the overall gross for the budget.
Senator Snagastine.
I think my colleagues need to understand, when you look at the top level, as was brought up earlier, as my colleague has mentioned, the gross, after you remove all the debt we have to pay, that's why we got a total appropriation. Like, for example, this budget today is 713. If this was to pass using that amount, that bottom, they'll basically get just a little bit more than what they're getting today. If we use the gross, we have to be very mindful that we're talking about everything else we have to pay, and whoever needs funds will not get, because why? It's set at the 0.25. Just to be mindful. So whichever one is decided by the body, the Office of Finance and Budget, my office, and whoever takes over would have to figure that out. Gross is the top. It's the 800 some, and if you go below whatever is used to appropriate, they would get today just a little bit more than they're getting today. Otherwise, they would get something like $2 million. There's the difference. So whichever one
Senator
is
Torres.
choose.
Senator Torres, does that answer the question?
If then, for example, on page 2, the general fund revenues amounts, total general fund revenue is $809,922. The total general fund revenues on page 3, after you take out income tax, the taxes, and you take out the reserves and everything, you're down to $713,256 available for appropriation, and that's on line 3. So the difference between $809,922 and $809,922,190 is very different from $713,256,152. That's my point. So if we were to say then that this, that we're going to appropriate and mandate that 0.25% of whichever, has a big difference, whichever is always going to be automatic, and shall include what we're already appropriating of 1.6, plus what we're proposing to appropriate an additional 371 from the unappropriate general fund balance of 2022. So in addition to giving them over 2 million, you're going to give them a guaranteed 0.25% if it exceeds that. And that's what I'm trying to understand is are we now not really giving them a set amount? We're giving a percentage that will go up and down. Or no, it can only go up, actually. Is that what we're saying?
Senator Tadaway?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the author had to take a quick emergency call real quick. Can we just take a short recess?
Yes.
Thank you. And
I'll
then
take
we
a
can-
moment's recess. We're back from recess. Senator Torres, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the answer to my question about what is taken, what is the 0.25% taken off, and the answer that I believe I heard was that it was the general fund gross revenues, which is the top line amount of $809,922.190. I'm concerned, Mr. Chair, that with the revenues that are collected, that number that we have now is a projection, but as we know from the past budget cycle, the revenues have exceeded. So the logical conclusion is that the collections to the OPA can, as the revenues go up, increase as well. So it's not a fixed appropriation and it's not a projected appropriation. And so I have concerns about that, and I believe that it is not correct to award them that sort of leeway. That's my feeling about it. So I would object to that. I also don't find it absolute that the auditor shall also administer the funds for the audits that are commissioned by the autonomous agencies also. I know that it perhaps is a control measure by the auditor, but I just believe in the ethical world of audits that, you know, the credibility of an independent auditor is exactly that. It's a credible and reliable source. So I don't agree with Section 3 also in giving him the purview. But I believe my question was answered, and I do have concerns then about taking off from a top line number before any deductions are. And it's a very big difference between $713 and $809 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Is there anyone else on the amendment? Senator Titagui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I stand in support of this amendment, especially in Section 4, which allows us the ability to, everyone to take heed that in FY24, this is something that we plan to doing, trying to right set the OPA's office and provide the funding that's needed. If everybody knows anything about accounting, one of the most important things is to be able to audit every single one of our government agencies, even the autonomous agencies, where it's majority of them are done by a private company like Deloitte & Touche, which is no longer going to be here on Guam. This puts additional strain on our OPA, trying to find another company to do these audits. What we're simply doing in Section 4 is just giving that leeway, getting ready for FY24 to provide that funding. In the meantime, we know that the Office of OPA is lost another employee. I mean, this is like almost 3 in this year that they're losing their employees, trying to hold them at an amount that is a lot lower than what some of these autonomous agencies are offering them. This simply assists the OPA, and this is a responsibility of this legislature to provide them all the means and definitely the funding to put this office in a position to provide the information that's desperately needed, especially today as we deliberate the budget. It all goes hand in hand. Other than that, any other reason to object to this is just, it doesn't make any sense, actually, because it's very responsible. And it's an amendment, I think, that the OPA has also been working with both co-sponsors, the sponsor and the co-sponsor with this amendment, reaching out to this body for assistance. We're not doing anything, raising any projections here or revenues here. We're just providing the needed resources that they need. Other than that, anything else is just, I don't know. We can all speculate why, but Mr. Chair, I stand in full support, and I think that this body understands the importance of the OPA's office, and I appreciate their support as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tadagui. Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I support this amendment. As we heard during the budget hearings of the public auditor, that the challenges that he has in keeping auditors within his office. And I think to keep this office running and properly auditing the different agencies and entities of the government of Guam, that we need to support this. Oh, I support the amendment, and I hope my colleagues do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Atta. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's really important that we support the independence of the public auditor, especially in times when there are some questions regarding especially we lost one of the vendors, private vendors who can provide these audits. And I think it is a reasonable investment as far as 0.0 or a quarter of a percent. Basically to match the amount of money, because they do provide a much needed service as watchdogs. I mean, there is a lot of questions that our community has when it comes to, how the money is being used, and we really need to shore up this office to ensure that somebody's looking out for the public interest when it comes to the expenditure of public funds. The other thing I like about this amendment is the part which the public auditor advocated for the office. And one of the things is the timeliness of audits. In Section 3 of this amendment, that, the ability to control the audit so that the timeliness of the audits can come out before the budget was one of the issues that was raised during the hearings. And so this part of the amendment addresses that concern. So I do rise in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Anyone else in the amendment? Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I too raise in support of this amendment. Mr. Chair, we have an Office of Public Auditor, or Public Accountability, for the purposes of making sure that there is somebody that's actually truly accountable to, and is the watchdog, basically, of how we spend our monies. And doing this, takes not just time and expertise, but money to do this thing, to do it as well. This has been a perennial problem for the Office of Public Accountability in the ability to, first off, show up the resources that they have, and so that they can conduct the work, the business that they do for the people in a very judicious and timely manner. And for many years, although we have this entity, we never did a good job of being able to properly fund them. And I think that this is a good start. One of the things that I can appreciate, and I've listened to the concerns that were raised, that this body can exercise its ability to be able to make the adjustments as necessary as we go along. But it's a start. It's a good start, so that this one entity is ensured that it has the funding that is necessary, to carry out its functions. I think there's not much more to be said than, I believe too that in as far as the autonomy, not just the autonomy, but not having to be handcuffed, if you will, with regard to the funds that it's supposed to receive, it can properly plan and get out, conduct the studies, the audits, if you will, in a timely manner, so that we too can have that information that's necessary. I constantly look through their reports to be able to get some guidance with regard to how this government spends its money. So I think in this case here, this is an investment well placed. So with that, Mr. Chair, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this matter.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Dueñas.
Mr. Chairman, I do also rise in full support of this amendment. I was talking to the author in the back when she was advising us on this proposed change, and I said, of course, nationally we have the Office of the Inspector General, which is very, very broad, and if you just go on their website and see the work that they do, and really in terms of government accountability and the resources they're given to do it, and even right now to oversee the federal dollars and the findings that they have on the massive releases of, assistance and the like. I mean, it's just so important and key. The other thing that I remember is during recent public hearing for the bill that the author of this amendment authored, to have the former OPA and first elected OPA come down and really speak to needing to shore up and properly fund. And in fact, I think we're going back to what the original intent when the office was put together, that to make sure it was strong and that it had the resources it needed to do what it did. That testimony was very heartening, and I know that this is what's being attempted here. Now, of course, if the budgets continue to grow over projections and the like, with increases, decreases, whatever else, we always have to tweak things here and there. But in closing, I think what's also very important, Mr. Chairman, is the former and the current, former Senator Doris Brooks, the first elected public auditor, and now Speaker Cruz, their perennial issue that they discuss is the ability to retain their auditors. And one thing that I think they both share, I've heard them both say, is at least most of the time when they're leaving to government of Guam agencies who have a budget to pay them higher, give them better compensation. So at least they're still there within the government agencies to be the watchdog, not necessarily under the auspices of the office, but they've proven their mettle, if you will, in terms of how they served at the Office of Public Accountability. But truly, I know their heart really means they'd probably rather bring some of them back under being able to compensate them the way that they're being compensated when they go to other large agencies. We know the hospital, some of the other autonomous agencies where the revenues are such that could carry the commensurate salary. And so I don't see, even with growing revenues, how that becomes disproportionate with an entity that really is, and it has proven to be the true watchdog. And we've seen the reports come out, and I just think government spending, by and large, over the last decade plus, has really been, how do I say this? I know that there is a factor when agency heads and others that control the revenues of this government know that they have the OPA, scrubbing the books. It makes, I believe it's built a lot of integrity, and I don't think that this proportion of the budget is out of line with the key mission that they have. So I certainly support this amendment in the way it's structured, and I commend the author for proffering it. Si Dios masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Anyone else on the amendment? If there's no one else, Senator Brown, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and certainly thank you to my colleagues that have risen in support of this amendment. I mean, the bottom line, Mr. Chair, and to our people is to ensure the proper accountability of public funds. Even more, as we are addressing this current budget that's over $1 billion, I think our people have an expectation that their money is being properly spent, and their money is being properly spent in their interest. And the key office that was created to do that is the Office of Public Accountability. And over the years, unfortunately, this office has not been provided with the resources that it needs to ensure that it can execute its mandates that the legislature and through the laws of this island have required that office to address. I mean, if we want to allow corruption to permeate in this government, all we need to do is continue to weaken the Office of Public Accountability. They have many times brought forth issues of concerns in this government that need to be addressed, and we need to give them the resources to take it to the next level, to show that not only do we identify where the problems are misspending in government, but what corrective action is being made and taken, so we have ultimate confidence in how our government is running, because I'd hate to think we're here appropriating all this money, but we don't have any insurance that the money's being properly accounted for on behalf of our people, because really, this is not our personal money. You know, it's the money of our people. We've simply been given the opportunity to decide that among our people for this time. And ensuring that we have a responsible government moving forward, we need to give this office the resources and the funding that it needs. And certainly, it can be adjusted depending on what the revenue is. It's going to go up or it's going to go down. But it's going to be concurrent with the overall amount of money that's generated by this government, because they have a tremendous mandate to oversee and make sure that these funds are being properly spent, they're being properly spent in the interests of our people, and they are being properly spent with regards to mandates of our laws that we have passed and have been adopted here on our island. So with that, Mr. Chair, thank you again, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on this proposed amendment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, there has been an objection, so all those in favor, please signify by raising your hands. Motion carries. Part 1 of Chapter 9 is now closed. I apologize, there's one more amendment. My mistake, my apologies. SB 276 TMB L13 P106, line 13, page 106. Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz Barnes, you are recognized.
Mr. Chair. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to proffer this amendment, and I hope my colleagues can support me on this effort. It's on page 106, line 13, section 2, continuing appropriation and authorization, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the allotted but unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Office of Public Accountability for fiscal year 2022 and prior shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended. Again, based on the retiring speakers and what we've been doing to work with OPA, I think this is in order, and we hope to provide them those resources to be utilized for their mission mandate. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me that opportunity to proffer this amendment.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. On the amendment, is there anyone on the amendment? If not, Vice Speaker, you may close. If not, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. Now we have completed Part 1 of Chapter 9, Office of Public Accountability. We are on Chapter 9, Part 2, Guam Board of Accountancy. There are no amendments. Those two sections are closed. We are now on Chapter 10, Guam Visitors Bureau. We'll take a moment's recess. I believe there is at least one amendment here. We want to make sure that we have the proper amendments passed out to everyone. We'll take a moment's recess. Chapter 10, Guam Visitors Bureau. We're back from recess. We are on Chapter 10, Guam Visitors Bureau. And there is an amendment, SB 276JBL9P108. That's line 9, page 108. Senator Joanne M. Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of this amendment is very similar to the one that I had proffered with regards to the Department of Customs. You know, and as we discussed the other day, I mean, we certainly are appreciative of the increased activity in our economy and seeing our visitors come back, and certainly the hope that our revenues will continue to increase as a result of it. But at the same time, as discussed during the public hearing process with our chairman of our Finance Committee, I just want to ensure that as increased revenue sources come in for the Guam Visitors Bureau through the Tourist Attraction Fund, that the amount of money that's been subsidized by the general fund decrease. They'll still get their full appropriation and the figure that's here, but in all fairness, we have a number of government agencies and other needs in the government of Guam that are dependent upon general fund revenues and have no other source of revenue to be able to fund other critical needs in this government. So it's very much really trying to just be fair to ensure that while we've been able to provide the support through the general fund, in all fairness, as these revenues of these funding sources continue to increase for the Guam Visitors Bureau, we're appreciative of that. We certainly want them to be reliant to go back to where they were prior to the pandemic. And then again, the monies that were provided by the general fund can be released back for other critical needs for this legislature to appropriate. So that pretty much summarizes this particular proposed amendment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like the author mentioned, when the same or similar amendment was made for customs, I raised the same objection because as we move through the quarters or the months, you could be good today and bad tomorrow. So I'd have to object to that because if we look at where GVB was at 2 years ago, we're not going to get there tomorrow. Probably next month or something further down the line, down the road. But until then, that's why we asked and we provided them some additional funding to help them get on their feet and continue to fight to bring back the tourism to Guam. So that's why I would raise my objection to this.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment, Senator Perez, you're recognized.
So I have a question. So should the TAF decrease, would the general fund then increase with this amendment? If I can ask that of the sponsor.
Does the
So
author
I know
yield?
the idea is to kind of have a stabilized funding. So what, does this amendment actually contemplate that?
Well, the intent of the amendment is not to reduce the amount of money. I mean, if they don't receive the amount, they'll continue to be subsidized to that amount by the general fund. I'm simply looking at additional revenues as it increases under the TAF and comes in, then it will offset what otherwise would have been general fund contributions. Because of course we ideally, as we hope to return back to normal, we want the Guam Visitors Bureau to go back and be dependent upon the Tourist Attraction Fund and the revenue stream they were originally created to receive and decrease the amount of dependence on the general fund. It's not to cut their appropriation. I'm assuming that if they don't get that amount on the TAF, the general fund will continue to subsidize until such time they have the level of revenues in their fund to take over that responsibility. But at the same time, and colleagues, for those of you that did not attend the budget hearings, and there's quite a number of members here that did not attend the budget hearings, this question was brought up during the public hearing for both Customs and the Guam Visitors Bureau as two key examples of entities that unfortunately, as a result, again, of the pandemic, the legislature had to subsidize through the general fund to keep these entities operating. But again, in all fairness, as we continue to recover, I assume it would be the desire of us to want to see, you know, if these funds are becoming more healthy, that they go back and be reliant on their funds. And again, as they can currently receive additional revenue, it will equally decrease the amount of revenue that's being subsidized by the general fund. That's simply all it does. If they don't increase, then they continue to be dependent on the general fund if the money's there. So it's not intending to decrease the amount of money, but again, I don't think it should be a financial windfall for them to continue to see increases under their fund and then still be reliant on the general fund at the same time, when, as I mentioned, there's so many other critical operations in this government that our people need support from that have no other source of funding other than the appropriations we do from the general fund. So to me, it seems like a very fair proposal in terms of the distribution of the money that's coming into the government.
Senator Perez, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Is there anyone else on the amendment? If there's no one else on the amendment, Senator Brown, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm just going to reiterate very briefly, that's really the intent. Again, I understand where we're at this point. As we hopefully continue to work towards recovery within our community, within our government, within our tourism industry, we look forward to having a vibrant tourist attraction fund. We certainly have much to gain from that. But at the same time, I don't want it to be viewed that we continue to subsidize and provide general fund money. If the TAF is continuing to receive its revenue, then the Guam Visitors Bureau and the important work they need to do to continue to promote the island. We understand that's an even bigger and heavier mandate now as we're trying to grow out of this pandemic. But at the same time, in all fairness, we should also ensure that as those monies, they should be freed up for other critical needs. Our people have many, many, many other critical needs in this community and expectations by this government that we are not funding, even in this billion-dollar budget, for what our people would determine to be the most critical needs that we have out there. And certainly if we have the opportunity to free that money, that assistance has been provided through the general fund, through this legislature, then it should be, returned and reciprocated to return those funds back here for the legislature to appropriate for other needs in our community. So that's simply, again, what the purpose of this amendment is. Not to take away from the Guam Visitors Bureau. They'll still have the same amount of money. It's just a question of which pot it's coming from as the TAF hopefully continues to be revived and be healthy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, there has been an objection, so all those in favor signify by raising your hands. Motion fails. That was the only amendment in Chapter 10, Guam Visitors Bureau. This chapter is now closed. We will now be going to Chapter 11, Miscellaneous Appropriations, but we will take a short recess. There's a lot of amendments in this chapter. We want to make sure that all the amendments are in the proper order. A moment's recess. Okay, we are now back from recess on Chapter 11, Miscellaneous Appropriations. The first amendment we have is SB 276 JSSA L6 P111. That's line 6, page 111, proffered by Senator Joe San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To my colleagues, this is a technical amendment to include Medicare Part A, which is the primary Medicare plan to qualify for other Medicare plans such as B and D. It is a recommendation from DOA. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment? Is there anyone on the amendment? Speaker Terlahi?
Can I just clarify? So the only amendment to the section in the bill is to add the letter A, Part A. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator San Augustine, you may close. If not, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276 TMT L1 P115. That's line 1, page 115.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, this is an amendment to the amendment being proposed by Senator Paris. Senator Paris should go first.
Okay, if this is an amendment to an amendment, then we will move this down.
Wrong amendment.
We'll take a moment's recess.
What's
Okay, we were back. We just had to make sure that we had the correct amendments in order. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was the amendment introduced very early on in our budget discussions to add another $200 to the COLA, cost of living allowance, and this was to bring it from $2,000 to $2,200. But we've confirmed, and this amendment was already made earlier in the bill, so I'll withdraw this amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the noted, there's no reason actually to proffer a withdrawal motion on that. So just noted for the clerks that that amendment is not being moved. Next amendment is 276 ALS L1 P115. That's line 1, page 115, ALS/JSA. Okay, I believe this has also been rescinded. Next amendment, SB 276 TMB L15 P116, line 15, page 116. Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz Barnes, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, if I may, this amendment is also in Chapter 12, and I think it should be in Chapter 12. It was uploaded twice, so I'd like to go ahead and withdraw this one because it's already uploaded in Chapter 12.
Okay, no problem. No need to withdraw, just as long as you don't move the amendment. So this amendment has been rescinded.
Because it's in Chapter 12.
Understood.
Thank you.
SB 276 SFP L15 P116. That's line 15, page 116. Proffered by Senator Perez. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment would add a new section to Chapter 11, which reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law, funds in excess of the adopted revenue levels enumerated in 1B of Section 2 of Chapter 1, the amount of $2 million shall be appropriated appropriated to Guam Water Works Authority's Sewer Loan Revolving Fund for the purpose of assisting customers with the cost of sewer connections. So the purpose of this amendment is to facilitate the implementation of sewer connections to ensure the protection of our aquifer. In March 2021, GWA released a report entitled The Cesspool and Septic Tank Elimination Study that prioritized sewer connections in those areas that are projected to exceed the midpoint of the nitrate maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams per liter before the end of this decade in the year 2029. Such occurrence will trigger additional requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act and will result in an increase in GWA's operational costs and rates to consumers. If nitrate levels are allowed to continue to rise beyond that, GWA may have to remove wells from service or install treatment, again at the expense of ratepayers, in order to be in compliance with the law and to protect public health. Additionally, nitrate is used as a general indicator of groundwater pollution, and that other contaminants that could enter the groundwater could include other things from household cleaners, laundry detergents, fabric treatments, pharmaceuticals, and a variety of emerging contaminants, including per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, which have been found in GWA's wastewater and therefore are expected to be present in some of these contaminants. So in this cesspool and septic tank elimination study, which was pretty comprehensive, it prioritized approximately 2,400 households with water but no sewer connections, but are within 50 feet of a sewer line, as well as 1,800 households with within 1,000 feet of a water production well. And using the modest implementation approach, GWA, which was also the most cost-effective, GWA projected they can connect 515 households with an estimated CIP cost of approximately $4 million. So this $2 million would go into the sewer revolving loan fund, and it could approximately assist about 100 to 222 households. 100 households if the maximum loan increases to $20,000, 222 households with the current max loan of $9,000. So this $2 million investment is just a fraction of what is needed, but it would help assist our community to connect to sewer where sewer is available and which poses risk to our drinking water. I ask my colleagues for their support. Situas Masi.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment, Vice Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes, you are recognized.
Situas Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I really didn't have an objection to this amendment. I just wanted to ask, and I know that the retiring speaker, the author of this amendment, spoke about the effect of how many households this $2 million could assist with, and us knowing that just to lay some pipes down to get water accessible or the sewer laid into residential houses could literally cost up in the thousands and thousands of dollars. I wanted to confirm that the number of residents that would be affected if this $2 million were to be appropriated into the GWA's sewer loan revolving fund, that would there be a limit per household of the resources that would go into each household? She said something to the effect of 9,000, but I just wanted to get a reiteration because I know that each household can probably go up to 20 to 40,000 for a hookup.
Senator Perez, do you yield to the question?
Yes, I do. And so currently the max loan amount is $9,000, but I believe there are proposed changes. So GWA is in communication with US EPA to change these terms, and they're looking at $20,000 as a max loan. Also, it's been my understanding that they're looking to, and they're working to find ways to reduce. Perhaps they're talking about a loan that could be forgiven. So, I think it's still in flux right now. But yeah, that's the response.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really thank the retiring speaker for sharing that input because, as a lot of us in this august body know, just to try and build a residential home besides the cost of what it is to build a home now, in the last 2 decades, I mean, in the last decade itself, has gone up really, really high, and the burden of them having to pay the additional funding for just getting a sewer line put in, I think that this would really, really help. I'm just hoping that the forgiveness portion on these efforts will be realized, because residential homes literally, that clientele literally pays more, and the banks can't cover that portion of, to put it into the mortgage. They haven't been able to cover that. So I really appreciate this amendment, and I support that. And I'm just hoping that with the negotiations going on right now, that more homes, besides the 100 to 200 homes, could be realized in accessing this program. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the amendment.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for the sponsor of this amendment, if she'd yield. I just want to
State the question.
inquire. I just want to inquire with regards to the program with the Guam Waterworks Authority. I mean, do they have the requirements? I mean, who's eligible to participate in this loan program and this funding?
Does the author yield to
Is
the
that
question?
something available to the public so that they can go further?
Yes, I
They're
yield.
certainly in need of this situation. The sewer lines within a certain amount of feet is mandated by law. You're required to be hooked up. If the sponsor of the amendment would yield to that question.
Does the author yield?
Right, sorry, can you repeat the question, please? I just want to make sure I got the whole question.
Please repeat the question.
I just wanted to inquire with regards to the actual program, this loan program at the Guam Waterworks Authority. What are the requirements in terms of who's able to apply for this type of program? Is there any income requirements, or, you know, because understandable, I certainly concur with all the concerns you raised with regards to, particularly over the northern Guam waterlands, of having those areas sewered so we don't have increased contamination going into our waterlands and ultimately our drinking water. But I just want to know, are there any requirements or criteria for residents who may be interested to go and apply for this loan program?
Does the
Income
sponsor-
levels, any other criteria that would determine eligibility to participate?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes, I do. So in looking at this septic elimination study, so basically you have to be a resident of Guam, and the terms are up to 10 years. So in order to be eligible, applicants must be a Guam resident, owner of a property not currently connected to public wastewater collection, and must have proof of being declined for financing to fund their sewer project from at least 2 banks, supported with a declination notice letter from the banks.
Senator Brown?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the information, just to provide more awareness to the public as well. Thank you, and thank you to the sponsor of the amendment. I certainly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Anyone else on the amendment? Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand in support of this amendment. We all know how expensive it is to hook up sewer, and we also know how critical it is, especially over the aquifer, to hook up sewer. We've been the beneficiaries of presentation after presentation, conference after conference, where they highlight the threat to our aquifer by continuing to allow septic tanks. But we also know how costly it is. So I think that the sponsor of this amendment has come up with a very good use of this $2 million and to put it into this loan revolving fund for homeowners to help homeowners hook up to the sewer. This is a great amendment, especially because the prices have always been too high and unachievable, we have seen. And yet the cost of living, all other costs of living continue to increase. So it's not looking likely at all without, GWA's use of ARP funds to hook up some few areas that they are highlighting, or infrastructure funds, that without that, it's not looking likely at all that we're going to increase our hookups to sewer. I think we might be looking at a decrease because of the cost of living and the cost of the sewer hookups. So I support this amendment in full. However, I have an amendment to the funding source of it. So right now, she's currently proposed to use excess Section 30 funds, described as, so this is the FY23 excess Section 30 funds. And as you know, previous amendments have appropriated these excess Section 30 funds that we're anticipating. And but the amount of this appropriation here is $2 million. So I think to make it more reliable and more almost guaranteed that it can occur, instead of being contingent on the receipt of a certain level of Section 30 funds, that this $2 million can be funded. And so I made an amendment to the amendment to fund it out of excess revenues from FY22. So today, we received the Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report for the month of July from BBMR, and it shows that even after the recent public laws that appropriated revenues for the GPA credits to energy consumers and for a moratorium on the gas tax, that there is still $35.8 million in net unobligated projected general fund revenue. That means that's the excess, right, for FY22. And just like we have done with the other appropriations this year using excess revenues from FY22 and FY21, we should set aside the $2 million of these excess revenues from FY22 for this assistance to those needing to pay for sewer connections. So that would be my amendment, Mr. Chair, just to change that funding source to what I believe is more reliable in this case for this large amount, $2 million.
Thank you, Speaker Talahi. The Speaker has proffered an amendment to the amendment, and that is SB 276 TMT L15 P116. And that's just to change the funding source on the amendment to the amendment. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no objections to having a more reliable funding source for something that's so much needed. So I thank the proffer.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Titagui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm not objecting to this amendment. In fact, it makes sense, considering we've already, earlier on in the budget, have utilized any excess revenue for Section 30. And if you add that up, it's almost $2 million, if I'm not mistaken. It could be a little bit over than $2 million. So, and of course, the excess revenue for FY22 is, I think it's there already. It's more sound, according to the CRER report. However, I just want to, tell my colleagues here to be very cautious as we move forward after this amendment's done, because what was anticipated from BBMR in special fund shortfall was $7 million. Today, we received a report, it's $8.6 million in shortfall for special funds. That can only anticipate that it's going to continue to grow as far as the shortfall. And just talking with OFB, it may even go to $12 million in the next couple months, because of course we have August and September left to go into this fiscal year. But there is showing some additional funding there, and it's very important that we have a cushion. Very important to have a cushion. Even more so to anticipate what the next CRER report is going to put out in August. But I don't object to this amendment. Again, it's sound funding compared to the original amendment. But to be cautious that we are going to see a larger shortfall in special funds, and we may not see this continue to grow, to have that cushion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. On the amendment to the amendment. If there's no one else, Speaker Chalahi, you may close.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank the previous speaker bringing concerns regarding shortfalls in the special funds, but I think that we can easily accommodate for that. We're almost at the end of August. We're definitely in the middle of August, past the middle of August. So, and so we've got 1 month. And yes, so I think that even accounting for an additional shortfall in special funds, this still allows, they reported today, 35.8 million. It still allows more than adequate revenue for the 2 million to ease the cost of sewer hookups for those in great need. And we've confirmed that through all of our budget hearings and other hearings from DOA and BBMR, that this type of language was adequate enough for them to actually spend the money for FY21 revenues without waiting for an audit. So again, yeah, that would be my recommendation to make this fund actually happen, yeah, and put that money in that revolving fund as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Chalahi. On the amendment to the amendment, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. Now, on the amendment as amended, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, this amendment appears to be great. The only problem I have is that, number one, I know all my colleagues know that the sewer system with GWA is pretty much outdated. So let's help people hook up to something that's just going to run through the lines and not get to where it needs to go. I have a problem with that. And not only that, but we have a lot of folks. I know of a lot of residents where I live, alone, for example. We don't have a line. So that will never help us. So for everybody else that there's no line in existence, we'll never be able to apply for this sewer loan revolving fund. And for anybody that's going through the process of hooking it up, what's the mechanism now to get them to get their money back if they already paid in to have it connected? If this was to go through? That's my biggest issue. As this revolving fund exists with $2 million, who are the customers? Maybe the author can tell me who the customers are, because I like to know which village they're at, because we know that the biggest issue is up north, the aquifer. And if it's revealed that there's thousands of homes, then sure. I live up north. And I'm in an area that there's a few hundred homes. There is no sewer line in that area. So I'm just very concerned, and then I can move on. If the author would yield to that question, where's this impact going to be at? I'm very curious, because I want to support people that want to apply for it. Without any problem.
Does the author yield?
Yes, I do. So I just want to make something really clear that this sewer loan revolving fund is for everybody. The study that was done basically just prioritized which households they were going to target, because increasing levels of nitrate, which can exceed the midway point of the MCL, which would trigger corrective action. So this sewer loan revolving program is for everybody. But what GWA is trying to prioritize, because they don't have the full amount of money, they wanted to prioritize those that are going to impact the drinking water the most. And so it's really open to everybody. So yeah, in regards to the sewer line, whether the sewer line is available or not. So what by statute, what's considered available is when a household is within 200 feet of a main sewer line. But this, from what my understanding is, that this loan program can assist both those that are where the sewer line is available and where it isn't. But what GWA is trying to attack is basically those that are going to impact the drinking water the most. I don't know if that answers the question adequately.
Senator San Augustine?
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to understand her response. If it's available, if it's not available, if it impacts our lens. I live up north. Anybody that builds up north impacts the water lens. So I'm just very curious is that where's this area that these funds are going to back? Are there developments? Because we're talking Chamorro Trust, there's no infrastructure yet. Many of them bring their water in. So I just want to make sure that the money's not just going in to sit. Because if we're talking about new development, if they got a loan from Guam Housing, that can be built into their loan as first-time homeowners to pay for whatever it costs. But $2 million, I'm in support of the intent of the fund and the funding source and the funds. But who are we helping? Who really are we helping? Let's be careful when we say north. I'm from the north. I think there's only 2 of us here from the north. And we don't see enough sewer lines. And I know for a fact that during previous hearings, not just this term, but last term, the sewer lines are broken. They need to get fixed. They need to be upgraded. There's many mechanisms in place. And I want to help anyone that wants to apply. Because if they ever bring the sewer line to where I live, I know everyone in that area is going to apply. And that's funding that will go right back to GWA anyway. So I just got a problem with letting money just sit when it could be used to help GWA get the lines in the areas. Not just necessarily help the customer. Get the lines in there. So that when they apply, then maybe GWA can come up with a plan to make sure it's affordable for every customer, regardless of where you're at, if they bring the lines in. Because I haven't heard of any lines being built right now for anywhere, unless you happen to be in the area. It's $3,000 or $4,000 a pop. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, in line with the question of the retiring speaker, I want to know the author has can yield to 2 questions that I have. First off, the first question is has GWA done a study, or do they quickly know just how many households could be made available to this program? And second question is, how many households do we have in the Northern Aquifer that don't have the sewer connection?
Senator Perez, do you yield to the question?
So the question in regards to how many households does a sewer loan revolving fund program, is it open to? Is that one of the questions? You can repeat the question, please?
If the question is, I'm guessing, one is I was a little confused here. Your initial presentation was that there were households that were within 50 feet of a sewer connection, and then there's another presentation you provided that said that they were within 200 feet of a sewer connection. Let's talk about, I guess, the one that are closer. Do they have a tally as to the number of households that are within 50 feet of the sewer connection but just don't have the resources to be able to connect to the sewer?
Okay, yes, they do. So in this study, so what's required by statute, what's considered where a sewer main is available is 200 feet. And so that number they calculated was 3,520 households. But they also considered that some of these households might require more infrastructure if there was a manhole, access to a manhole. And so they decided to use a conservative distance of 50 feet. So that brought the number down to 2,471 households that are within 50 feet. So basically that can connect to a sewer more easily. And then they also looked at how many households were within 100 feet of a water-producing well. And so they also came up with a number of 1,838 households. And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to prioritize because the resources are not enough to assist everybody, right? So they wanted to identify which will provide the best protection, considering that some of these wells are showing increasing levels that would exceed the halfway point of the maximum contaminant level. And just so those wells are in the north. Finnegodzin, so F18, Manilao, EX11, Jigo Tumon, M15, Manilao, M4. So they were able to identify specifically which wells and which areas they were going to prioritize considering their limited resources.
Senator Blas?
Thank you for that. And I guess it goes back to what is my one other question that if the author can yield is does GWA then have an existing plan for a program such as this?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes, so through the infrastructure bill, they have received additional funding to put money into the sewer revolving loan fund. But they only have earmarked $250,000, and that's not enough. And so I think with this additional funding, it would help to facilitate a lot more of these connections where they have identified where the priority areas are.
Senator Blas?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. No questions.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Anyone else on the amendment as amended? Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The author would yield to a question, and the question is, how many people are currently in this loan program, and what happens to the funds as the loan is being repaid? Does it go right back into the account that it came from, or does it go into GWA's general account? And if she will yield to those questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does the sponsor yield?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I do yield. And I think that's the beauty of a revolving loan fund program is that as the payment is made, it goes to, it avails itself for additional households. So it could be a sustainable funding mechanism. So yes, it does go back to this loan program that can then fund additional households to connect to sewer. As far as the number of consumers that are on the program, I would have to go back and check to see who's actually, or how many people are actually availing themselves of this program. Thank you.
Senator Atta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, another question, if the author would yield, is there income limitations onto this loan program, or, because I heard earlier that she said it's open to all, and they have to just, I guess, have 2 refusals from a banking or a lending institution. So is there income limitations, or is this open to all regardless of income?
Does the sponsor yield to the question?
Yes. And so I'm looking at the document, and so I guess, yeah, thank you for that clarification. So there has to be basically a declination from 2 banks. So yes, I suppose there would be a potential, if you're making enough money, that there's a potential that it might not, for those customers that have funding, there may not be this option, but again, the terms are being renegotiated. I believe GWA is working to facilitate more use of this fund, because as you know, Guam, we have a lot of households that are in need, and perhaps this is something that can be looked at again.
Senator Atta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the only questions I have.
Thank you, Senator Atta. Anyone else on the amendment as amended? If there's no one else on the amendment as amended, Senator Perez, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the questions from my colleagues. I think it's important to make sure that we're investing this money properly, and I think the sewer loan revolving fund is a proper investment considering the need that's out there. And more importantly, we need to protect our one resource that provides drinking water, or at least provides most of our island with drinking water, and it's up to us to make sure that we take the proactive measures. And I think this is a modest investment into our environment and the health of our people, and I ask for my colleagues' support.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment as amended, there has been an objection. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hands. Motion carries. We are now on SB 276 SFP L15 P116. Amendment proffered by Senator Perez to line 15, page 116. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment reads to add a new section to Chapter 11 entitled Additional Appropriation for the Northern and Southern Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Notwithstanding any of the provision of law, funds in excess of the adopted revenue levels enumerated in 1B of Section 2 of Chapter 1, the sum of $100,000 is hereby appropriated to the Northern and Southern Soil and Water Conservation Districts and shall be equally divided between the two districts, and allowing legal to renumber and make technical corrections. And so currently what we have in the budget bill is that the appropriations for both the Northern and Southern Soil and Water Conservation Districts is $133,466, when divided equally amounts to $66,733 for each district for the full entire year. So what this amendment does, it aims to appropriate additional funding, which is $50,000 for each district, from potential collections over projected from the Section 30 funds. And so this additional $50,000 will go to supporting the mandates of both the North and the South Soil and Water Conservation Districts towards conservation of our natural resources. And both districts have been hard at work in fulfilling these mandates. Some of the accomplishments in the past year include continuation of the feral swine program with USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services, to control and manage feral swine populations, which wreak havoc on our watersheds and cause a lot of erosion. They've also partnered with UOGC grant on the Guam Restoration of Watersheds Initiative. They've developed a 5-year long-range plan to address Guam's priority resource concerns with a targeted conservation proposal focused on improving Guam's soil quality of crop lands and associated ag lands. They've also provided technical conservation assistance to Guam agricultural producers with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS. They sponsored and helped support various initiatives such as the Department of Ag pig and deer hunting derbies, as well as the annual Center for Island Sustainability, the Guam Green Growth Initiative, and other agricultural focused programs. They've also strengthened district operations to ensure transparency and accountability. They help build capacity to acquire innovative sources of funding to support the mission efforts and more conservation efforts. They've also managed, so Michael Uggan, who's a part of the Southern Soil and Water Conservation District, is now on the task force for the National Conservation District. And his role is to help address the Farm Bill nationwide. And so they're very hard at work, with the amount of money that they're getting, which is I think it's a wise investment. And I ask for my colleagues for their support to help to continue their efforts in conserving and protecting our environment, as well as improving food security for our island. Zdus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment. Is there anyone on the amendment? If not, Senator Perez, you may close.
No need.
Senator Perez, you may close.
One quick recess.
Moment's recess.
Okay. 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 Yeah.
Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Yeah. Thank you for that moment recess. I just asked for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276, SFP L15 P116. That's line 15, page 116. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment reads to add a new section to Chapter 11, authorization to offset shortfall for Guam Environmental Protection Special Funds. So an amount equal to the shortfall in collections for the Air Pollution Control Special Fund, the Pesticide Management Fund, the Water Protection Fund, and the Litter Control Revolving Fund is hereby appropriated from fiscal year 2023 surplus. A shortfall is defined as a collections below the 3-year average of the cumulative amounts from fiscal year 2019, 2020, and 2021 for said funds. So the purpose of this amendment would be to facilitate offsetting shortfalls in Guam EPA special funds upon the passage of Bill 162-36 or upon the enactment of Public Law 3675, which codifies that some of Guam EPA's special funds are non-lapsing and not subject to transfer authority, which would allow sufficient control of these funds upon the recommendation of US EPA through an audit. The funds that were included in the public law, so there was some discussion in regards, so this is the first budget bill where these funds are not included. And so there was a discussion as to whether what happens when there's a shortfall in these funds, would it be easy to have these funds offset using the general fund? And so there was some question as to whether that would occur, and so the purpose of this, that's why this amendment was brought to the forefront, considering that we are experiencing shortfalls in the special funds, and I wanted to make sure that Guam EPA is not overlooked and to ensure that their funding source is stabilized. And so especially with the regulatory mandates that Guam EPA has, I think it's important to ensure that their funds remain at least stabilized, especially when there are shortfalls. So I ask my colleagues for their support.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Titlegy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I stand in full support. Basically, this amendment is going to do what it's been doing for the last 2 budgets that I've been involved with, and one is whenever there's a shortfall at the end of the fiscal year, the general fund is there to capture it. But this one does the same thing. I mean, it'll do the same thing, but it's actually giving an average cumulative on how much they'll be able to cover it. So I have no objection to this. It's very simple. It's actually what we do. And that's why, if you look at this year, we're having a shortfall so far of $8.6 million in the special funds, and that's not even incorporating the smaller special funds. But at the end of the year, we plan on covering those shortfalls, like we do every year. So I have no problem with this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I hope I'm reading the right amendment. When the section there is hereby appropriated from fiscal year 2023 surplus, we're not done even passing 2023 budget. You cannot appropriate something that's not yet even done. And at the end of the year, like my colleague mentioned, there's a recap to identify how we can cover them. And at the same token, when this bill was passed in reference to these funds, EPA's, I think if I'm correct, I may be wrong, but they said that they're going to use whatever they got and they'll move forward. I think if there's a bill introduced and they have extra money and they need, or there is truly a shortfall, then we deal with it then. But I couldn't support identifying that automatically in 2023, when we get to that next year, that we're going to go ahead and cover it. I can't see that far. I don't have like my colleagues have mentioned, I don't have a crystal ball either. And I prefer that we go through the budget, we go through the years, and as and when the reports come out and identify their shortfall, then we can sit as a body and start saying, we have a shortfall here. Can we make sure the special funds are covered? And no other projects, but go after those first. Then the special funds can start working. But to say an amount equal to the shortfall in collection for air pollution control special fund, and all the other funds they identified here. Well, what happened to every other fund that exists in the special funds? All of them are special. They all require our attention. And I'd have to object to this because it just doesn't sound right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment. Anyone else on the amendment? If there's no one else on the amendment, Senator Perez, you may close.
One moment, please.
We'll take a moment's recess. Speaker Terlahi, on the amendment, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see nothing wrong with this amendment, and I would support it. My question is, it's supposed to be an amount equal to the 3-year average of the cumulative amounts from fiscal year 2019, 2020, and 21, the shortfalls from each of those years, and 21 should be closed by now. So I just want to know how we don't know that number and why we're not just using that number. Oh, because it's different numbers for each fund? Is that the reason? If the author would yield, yes, that would be my question.
Could you restate the question, please?
Yeah, so it says we're going to appropriate an amount equal to the shortfall. And shortfall means the 3-year average of the cumulative amounts from fiscal year 2019, 2020, and 21 for each of these funds. And my question is, isn't this calculated, aren't we able to know those amounts already since 2021's closed, the audit's done? So we should know the shortfall amounts for each of the funds and just cover those. And covering it from FY2023 surplus, we've seen this in previous bills where they use the surplus of the year that we are in, or that this budget will be in, and that they hadn't even got to that point yet. We've seen that before. That's nothing new. But I just want to know why we aren't saying certain amounts.
Does the sponsor yield to the question?
Yes, so I did, there was an option of putting the actual amounts or the formula, so I can, that amount was actually provided, so I can actually change it if need be.
All right.
That's
Well,
an amendment that's needed.
Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you to the sponsor, yeah. I guess if we have the amounts, then we can talk offline and find out, and that would be something concrete. If that's concrete, it should be calculatable, and that's fine. So then I have no objection to this amendment, as long as somebody's going to know exactly what those amounts are. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else in the amendment? If there's no one else, Senator Perez, you may close.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, this amendment really basically addresses what, or basically it reiterates what we normally do when there's a shortfall in special funds, that we cover it with general funds. And so being that we're expecting an 8-point-some million shortfall in special funds, I wanted to ensure that Guam EPA is covered, especially now that these funds have been taken out from the budget. So I just want that to be an assurance by at this point in time as we're talking about the budget. I think it's really critical that we need to support Guam EPA, which is following their mandates, especially with the air pollution control, litter control revolving fund, which addresses illegal dumping, the water protection fund, which protects our water, pesticide management fund, which ensures that we're not being affected by harmful chemicals. I think this is a wise, investment that our government needs to make, and to shortchange them would mean shortchanging our people. So I ask for my colleagues' support. I'm open to, if there's a discussion that needs to be made, but I think it really, this is what our, OFB has been doing, or at least our government has been doing. They've been covering shortfalls. And I just wanted to make it abundantly clear that we're not leaving these funds out, which are doing a great service for our island and the health of our people. So I ask for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment, there was an objection, so all those in favor, please signify by raising your hands. Again, all those in favor, raise your hands. Motion fails. Okay, it is now 5:25. We have 3 more amendments left in this chapter, but we agreed we would be recessing at 5:30 until tomorrow, so I don't think we can get through any of these amendments in 5 minutes, unless Speaker's amendment can. I'll go ahead and recognize you on your amendment, Madam Speaker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So my amendment is to line 15, page 116. It's to appropriate $90,000 from the unappropriated general fund revenues collected in excess of the adopted revenue levels. So this is excess FY22 monies, $90,000 to the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. This is for the purpose of, they're in the middle of digitizing records, and they need 1 more staff. And they only have like 2 or 3 staff, if I recall correctly. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, because 1 was only a limited term. So this is just to allow them to hire 1 more and to continue to digitize these records and make those available. As you know, these records have become even more important after the settlement in the Chamorro Land Trust case, because land takings and the record of land takings is a critical component now for eligibility for Chamorro Land Trust recipients. So the Chamorro Land Trust has been saying, go to the ancestral lands because they have all the records. The problem is, as you've seen with other government agencies, but this one is critical, these land records have been stored in places that were not conducive to storage of papers, right? And so they are at risk, and some of them already have been destroyed, but they are at high risk of continuing to deteriorate. And I want to commend them that they actually have begun to scan these. They've been important in court cases recently as well, as to whether lands in these court cases were under ancestral landowners. So that's the amendment. And so again, it's to use FY22 excess just to give only $90,000 to ancestral lands.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. On the amendment, Senator Bloss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the author of the amendment can use a question, and the question is basically, Is this to fund a position that has already been established? And they just don't have the money to be able to hire?
Does the sponsor yield?
That's correct. They said in their budget hearing that they need this amount, or actually they need more, like 100,000. This is an amount that was equal to the amount that was supposed to be given to them from the consolidated lot funding, remember? And that DOA testified that the money was there, BBMR said it's gone, and so now, they can't find that money that was actually owed to the ancestral land. So this is the equivalent amount, $90,000 from a different source, just to get them to continue with, it's either a limited term employee or, yes, and I'm pretty sure they have a space for it, but they've not filled it in like prior years because of lack of funding. But I think it's very critical today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Chalahi. Senator Blas, anyone else on the amendment? If not, Speaker Chalahi, you may close. If not, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. Okay, at this time, we will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow, where we will continue with the remaining 2 amendments in this chapter, and that will close out the chapter. We are at recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow.